Hey darlings. Julia Chernyashova stood in the middle of the kitchen at a wide marble counter and happily cut the salad. The girl was preparing to celebrate their third anniversary of marriage with her husband, and therefore wanted to cook something special for Ignat on that evening. Having burst into the culinary book, she stopped her choice of the most tender mushroom risotto and fish baked in a special creamy sauce, a recipe that Julia had not invented herself for a long time. In the refrigerator, a bottle of excellent white wine was specially prepared for this festive day. At the moment when the girl was going to cut tomatoes in a figure, her head suddenly turned very dizzy. Instinctively, throwing off the sharp knife, Julia grabbed the countertop as tightly as possible and clung tightly. The world around her, even with her eyes closed, did not stop spinning, as if a carousel in an amusement park, where they forgot to turn off the speed and rotation regulator. With difficulty reaching the chair, Julia sat down and began to deeply breathe on the crack. 1, 2, 3. Trying to calm down the breathing. The heart, as if locked in a bird's cage, was throbbing and as if threatened to jump out. This girl was constantly waiting patiently for this hateful nonsense to pass. It was no longer the first attack in recent times. With a frightening purity, weakness, and a sharp head spin, they repeated again and again, forcing Yulia to seriously think about her health. The girl was only, but in the last couple of months she felt like she was, that she could not even tear her head off the pillow. The pressure jumped to such a degree that I had to call an ambulance a couple of times. However, the doctors only carried out the operation by hand. None of them were able to determine the cause of her suffering from insomnia. The doctors assigned the girl with an endless analysis, and every time they said the same thing. According to all the main indicators, Julia is perfectly healthy, and the sudden pressure of the attack could most likely be the consequence of meteorological sensitivity or some kind of magnetic storm. In other words, for Julia, her condition remained a real mystery. The situation also became more complicated by the strange reactions of the spouse. Instead of supporting the sick wife, Ignat was just grumbling. "Yes, Julia, you can spoil your mood and you won't say anything. They don't know why I need you so much." "Ignat, why are you saying that?" The wife was asking, not understanding. "We've been together for 3 years, and I've never been sick before. Do you think I'm in the most pleasant state? And about the fact that we don't have any children with you, it seems like there's no time yet. You heard yourself what the doctors said. I'm healthy, and you just need to wait for pregnancy." "Yes, because something is always wrong with you." Ignat threw her with a curse. "You have one thing for one thing, you have another thing for another, you lack attention, you feel unimportant, you are tired. I need a normal wife, strong and healthy, cheerful in the end. And with you they live exactly like a toad, cold and boring and even sick." Yulia then swallowed the offense. She was not clear why the man was so sharply angry at her. Lately, the girl seemed to think that he lives with her exactly from under the stick, as if he was forced to do it, although they did not need anything. They lived in a beautiful big house, and they were not offended by money. The parents of the spouse were very influential businessmen, and their wealth was directly calculated in the sense of tens of millions. Perhaps that is why Ignat was so spoiled. He has been used to getting everything he wants since childhood, and was very angry when something did not go his way. He brought family life to them and Yulia. Everything in the house was subordinate to the desire of Ignat himself, and the wife, in fact, did not depend on anything. The maximum that she could afford was to choose bedding and curtains for the living room. The rest was envied by her husband and his mother, Vera Fedorovna. A smart and powerful woman often came to visit them. However, she, oddly enough, was much softer and kinder with Julia than her inborn husband. She advised the girl very carefully and correctly how to better cook one or another dish that her precious son would definitely like. and invariably gave Julia herself valuable instructions regarding how the wife should look like such a wealthy and respected person as Ignat was. How long have you been visiting the beauty salon? I was interested in how you would not care about your blood. I don't blame you for anything, just in my opinion, you should already renew the haircut, and at the same time make the layout more interesting. In response to this, Julia only shyly pressed her lips. Yes, Vera Fyodorovna didn't have time for everything. She hurriedly said, I was spinning, either the cooking, either the cleaning. He then said that they have terrible drafts in the office in winter. You can freeze them at once. It is necessary, such a modern building, and suddenly drafts. The girl was stunned. Only then she realized how stupid her words should sound. Ignat worked as the director of the well-known designer agency throughout the country. The office was located in one of the largest business centers in the capital, where, surely, heat insulation was provided and high-quality unblown glass packages were standing. However, who cared anyway that in the evenings in the office it was blowing hard from somewhere? Oh, Julia was caught. So he hinted that jumper wanted from the last collection, Kashmirovas. Yes, Vera Fedorovna? And slightly covered her eyes. She liked watching Julia gradually master the laws of her world. A world of the rich and capable of buying anything for herself by people. It's okay, my dear. The reliable one clapped the bride in the hand. Soon you will finally learn everything, and you will be able to predict the wishes of my son by the one stroke of his eyelashes. And as for the salon, you still think. Nothing can paint a woman as good skin and high-quality hair. Still, you and Ignat should sometimes go out into the world, and there, who knows what people might think about you. You have to look appropriate. Julia kept silent and did not tell Vera Fedorovna that her son had long preferred to go to all world events alone. Every time she left the girl alone at home, as if she were not his wife at all, or as if he was shy in front of her colleagues. Julia had never been to her husband's work either. A couple of times when she wanted to bring her husband to a working place for a hot home lunch, he only ignored her, referring to his busy schedule and promising her that he would definitely go to a local restaurant, where, in his opinion, there was a very good Japanese cuisine. Okay, I'll probably sign up for my master's tomorrow. Right, daughter? And politely clapped her tongue. You can never let yourself go, because you know how much he has on the job of all kinds of professors. Vera Fedorovna was heading to the exit, thanking Julia for the tea, when she suddenly stopped. Looking around, she seemed to have noticed something in her memory, and then spoke sweetly, turning to her son's wife. And here's Yulia again. She said in the tone of another instruction. In your place, I would still hire a servant. It's not good to wipe these tables with ink from the floor itself. Yulia calmly answered. Thank you, Vera Fyodorovna, but here I probably won't agree with you. I don't need strangers in the house, and I'll do the cleaning myself no worse than a hired worker. Why spend money on it? On her face, blood spilled unpleasant expressions. Well, as you know, not even about said Elon. Just for God's sake, I beg you, don't clean up even when Ignat is here. He doesn't like all this. When his son was little, he was basically irritated by cleaning, and by those who regularly spent time with him in our house. Vera Fedorovna deliberately did not use the offensive word of a cleaner for Julia, but with all her appearance she made the girl understand that she would not want to see her young daughter-in-law in such a despicable role. Julia tried. True, she tried to become such that she could at the same time please her stylish husband and noble sister-in-law, who, as she always convinced the girl, wished them only good for their son. However, the situation did not change. The relationship with the spouse became more and more intense. Moreover, the initiative was clearly from Ignat. The man found a small reason to only get attached to his young wife, and the further, the more absurd his demands became for her. Why are you holding the fork in the left hand, Julia? Once he asked her in the restaurant, when they, for some time, decided to go out for a festive dinner together about the conclusion of Ignat. Another, especially profitable for his agency deal. The wife in response only, perhaps unervingly, shoulder. I do not know. I have been used to it since childhood, probably. I have a more convenient left hand. And I do not. Suddenly the husband got angry. Why do you have everything forever not like people? Can't you eat normally with your right hand? Julia scaredly turned around. Ignat spoke loudly, and the girl was afraid that other visitors of the restaurant would now start looking at them. And another scandal was clearly not her thing. Quiet, dear, calm down. She tried to make her husband understand. What difference does it make how I eat? No one is looking at us anyway. Just in case, they didn't look until you started to openly explain this moment to me. Ignat instantly changed his face. His skin turned red. Instead of calmly continuing the dinner, or at least something to answer to Julie, the man with the noise threw a towel on the table, lying on his knees until that moment, and, rising from the table, spoke out loud, so that all the guests of the restaurant would hear it for sure. Thank you, dear wife. I'm full. I'm full of your uneducatedness and truly plebeian manners. If you want, you can enjoy the dinner further, alone. Because I do not intend to endure such an uneducated person next to me. Thank you, Julia. My mood is completely ruined today, and all thanks to you. With these words, Ignat, ignoring the prayer of his wife to stay, went to the exit from the restaurant. Of course, Julia had nothing else to do except to follow him. She was definitely some kind of damaged dog, who, in front of everyone in the yard, read the owner for his bad behavior. And sometimes Julia was amazed. Where could there be so much snobism in a young, year-old guy? Was it worth saying that the husband behaved completely differently at the very beginning of their relationship? Nothing could prepare the girl for what her husband would turn out to be after he put a ring on Julia's finger. Only gradually his true nature began to manifest itself in her, and the girl had to confess that life with a rich and promising man is not always roses, honey, and romantic flights on a private plane to Europe. There is still shame in such a life, moral discomfort, and constant desire to understand what exactly you did not please your second half, one way or another. But Julia wanted to make up with her husband, and therefore, having discovered in the calendar the date of the anniversary of the wedding, decided to prepare a romantic dinner for them with Ignat himself, in order to try to smooth out some of the angles in their relationship. The girl hoped that she would still be able to bring spark of interest to her husband, and therefore, she put all her strength into making the evening really perfect. Waiting for the sudden weakness and stupidity to come to her, Julia continued to cook a salad. To make her not so lonely, her husband was at work as usual. The girl turned on a miniature radio, which was standing here, on one of the hanging shelves. Julia loved listening to music while she was preparing, and now, by clicking several times on the liquid crystal display and finding her favorite radio station, she made the sound louder and started singing familiar popular motives, not forgetting to check. How does her main dish live in the oven? Having cooked a special cheese plate for the wine, consisting of several varieties of premium cheese, the girl wanted to throw the package from the products into the garbage bin. Having opened a small box under the sink, Julia bent over to get into the garbage bin. What a surprise it was when at the bottom of an almost empty plastic bucket, having taken into her hands a cardboard red and white box, Julia turned it over and over again, but could not remember at all that she or Ignat had bought something like this at home in a family pharmacy. Turned off the oven. The girl went into her room and opened a small, elegant notebook, which was once given to her husband for their first annual anniversary. With a freezing excitement, Julia entered the name of the drug in the search bar. A second before the light blue wheel of the browser was spinning, and then Razum gave her several pages, on which various sites were presented, where the found girl and medicine could be purchased. Some of them were in Russian, but the overwhelming majority in English. By clicking on what seemed most reliable to her, Julia immediately turned on the automatic translation of the pages. Now let's see what I found. After a few minutes, it became clear that she had one of the drugs in the group of light neuroleptics in front of her. At the same time, it is very dangerous if you take it for too long. Having read the section of side effects and problems with overdosing, Julia experienced an unprotected horror. In both cases, the result was complete intoxication of the body and a high probability of a heart attack, up to the lethal outcome. But how could they have taken the package of such a dangerous and such a cheap medicine from home? It was ordered obviously from abroad, which all the stickers also testify to, written only in English. Looking at the price, the girl quietly whistled. Even if it was an antidepressant, it was definitely from some group of elite drugs. Julia felt how she was slowly but surely panicking. Some of the same questions were constantly spinning in her pretty dark hair and head. What did such a medicine do in their garbage bin? And who even needed to buy it? As far as she remembered from Ignat, if there were problems with irritability and unsubstantiated flashes of aggression, then he did not treat them in any way, considering his behavior absolutely normal. What about Vera Fedorovna? She, of course, suffered from some heart problems. But I wouldn't take such a drug, and they have it at home. The girl was sitting on her bed, looking at the laptop screen, and the panic in her was mixed with a despair that was coming from the depths of her soul. Even to consult her about this whole situation was no one, because Julia was a round orphan. Her parents, as the girls in the kindergarten said, died in a terrible car accident many years ago. The baby was barely 3 years old then. So Julia immediately found herself in the shelter, where her entire childhood and youth passed. Julia's friends were also almost gone after the release, and to those she still supported even with some minimal communication, she was ashamed to go with such problems. They will also say that Cherny has already become angry with her wealth of fat and will close the door in front of her nose. In the end, Julia didn't think of anything better than to talk about the mysterious package of medicines to her own husband. Maybe Julia just doesn't know anything about Ignatia? Maybe he actually needs help himself? So he drinks these pills secretly from her, so as not to disturb his wife's health once again and again. Nervous and biting her lips, the young woman typed her husband's number, while continuing to spin an empty package in her free hand. Long gurgles were heard, and then an unhappy voice of Ignat. "Yes, Yulia, what happened?" asked her husband rudely. "Dear, hello. I am not distracting you," she clarified just in case. A rustling sound was immediately heard in the phone, and then several unobtrusive sounds were heard, which Yulia could not understand by nature. Then she heard her husband's voice again. "I'm at the meeting. Tell me quickly what's wrong with you." Julia briefly outlined the Ignaz situation before hearing how another portion of curses and insults poured down on her from the pipe. "Julia, are you a fool? You have already gone completely crazy from the indecency. What the hell did you even go to dig in the garbage?" The young wife felt as if a familiar lump of tears and excuses was coming up to her throat. Ignat, meanwhile, did not stop attacking her. "No, I just want to understand. What are you doing there for one whole day? Don't you want to let your bad energy into some useful funnel? I don't know, go to the beauty salon, buy yourself some clothes, go to yoga, sign up at the end of the day. Why do you call me every time and make such nonsense? You don't understand that I have a responsible job, that I earn money to have all this. Why can't you be at least pleasant in response? I don't know how to wish me a good day. Ignat, I was just preparing and I didn't think it could make you so angry. But this is really strange. What if someone else broke into our house while we were away? What if someone deliberately threw this package at us to compromise you or me?" I tried to reach Julia's husband by pressing the phone. It seemed that a little more and her own morning would be flooded with tears. Lately, almost none of the conversations with Ignat ended in anything but tears. At the other end of the phone, Well, okay. Let's say if someone even wanted to compromise me, then what? A pack of some incomprehensible pills? What do you mean? I'm not even talking about you. Who did you give it to? Stop talking to me like that. Julia couldn't stand it, shouting out words that had long been trying to slip out of her tongue. The laugh at the end of the phone immediately stopped. How so? With clear sarcasm in his voice, the husband asked again. You know, Julia answered him. It's like I'm an empty place for you. For a minute, it was quiet in her flat smartphone, and then Ignat spoke more calmly. Then stop behaving like a choked hysterical, and better wish me successful negotiations. Successful negotiations. Julia answered him with an icy voice and abruptly completed the challenge. She understood. Her husband clearly does not agree with her, although his arguments seemed quite logical to her. Who will come to them in the middle of the day, or even at night just to throw this evil medicine? On the other hand, he reacted too angrily to her quite innocent question, and this meant that July's mystery was still approaching. Thinking a little, the girl made the only right decision in her opinion, and quickly, changing into simple jeans and leather jacket, ran out of the house. After that, she got into her small car and warned the security that she would return in a couple of hours, and went to the nearest town. They lived in a closed cottage in the village for the very rich residents of the capital. Having found themselves in the city, Julia went straight to the special equipment store, where she bought a miniature hidden camera. When she returned home, the girl independently set her up in the kitchen, right above the table, where they usually had breakfast with their spouses. Now she only had to wait for Ignat, and then maybe she will finally learn the whole truth. That same evening, Julia met Ignat in a luxurious color of a Bordeaux dress, beautifully covering her young, structured figure. She laid down her thick, dark hair in the way that the most fashionable celebrities have done in recent years. A thin layer of primary school makeup was applied to the face of Julia, which the girl made in advance with the help of a professional makeup artist. The whole view of Chernyshev's wife was subconsciously hinting at the triumph of the current moment. I must say that Ignat was very impressed. What? He did not expect such an appearance from his simple wife. For a second, the man even believed that his mother's advice had finally aroused at least some sense of purpose over Yulia. Wow, you look great. With unwavering admiration, the husband said, Why do you dress so gracefully? Julia just smiled quietly at the edge of her lips. Well, I'm a good wife. Yes, I see. With a note of grievousness in her voice, the man said, And I'm very glad, Julia, that you learned today's lesson. And still, in honor of what did you dress up so? Julia was somewhat offended by this vulgar word dressed up, but she pretended that she didn't notice anything. She decided to be cunning, so that the husband would relax and behave as naturally as possible. He shouldn't have suspected anything. Oh. Having blocked the husband with her finger, Thomas said to Yulia, It seems that someone has forgotten that we are celebrating the anniversary today. It was on this day 3 years ago that we got married, dear. Oh, really, that's right. Ignato looked confused, as if you had completely forgotten about this important date. Julia smiled. I have prepared a small festive dinner for us. Let's go to the kitchen. I hope you will appreciate the treat for the dignity. The spouses went into the spacious kitchen, decorated with marble and dark wood. The very fish in the creamy sauce, risotto, cheese plate, and fruits were decorated on a wide table. Looks just amazing, praised his wife. And the smell? Mm. The man covered his eyes with his nose with delight. I'm sure nothing is tastier. I haven't eaten anything lately. I hope. Joking, Julia answered him and immediately added, You put everything you want for now. We can start the operation if you want to try wine first. I'll be right back. I need to check something in the bedroom. Promising, raising her eyebrows, Julia, with all the grace, on which she was only able to, as seductively slipped out of the kitchen. After waiting minutes in her room, in addition to the shared bedroom, each of the spouses in the huge house had their own personal room, in which everyone could do their own business or just be alone with their thoughts. She returned back. Ignat met her with 2 full glasses of a wonderful light drink, from which a gentle and slightly patient aroma poured over the entire kitchen. Sorry, I couldn't resist. I already took 1 sip while you were gone. The husband spoke in an apologizing tone. Wine and truth are magical. A wonderful choice, dear. Julia noticed that in the other hand, he held another almost full glass. Will you try? The husband asked her, friendly, while giving her an alcoholic drink. Of course. The girl smiled in such a way that she had charming little holes on her cheeks, in which her husband had once fallen in love so much. The evening of the anniversary went surprisingly well. Ignat was attentive and caring, constantly praised the wife's shiver, and in general, the couple laughed a lot, remembering the past, and those happy moments that accompanied them for the first few months of their life together. It was then that the life and evil nature of Ignat destroyed the whole idyll, and at first everything was just wonderful, and Julia sometimes felt that she had fallen into a real fairy tale. When the dinner was over and Julia wanted to put the dirty plates in the dishwasher, she was suddenly again struck by a head spinning. Barely having time to grab the chair, she felt like a wolf under her feet. Oh! Only then did she manage to say to the woman, putting her hand on her head, "What is it? Are you feeling bad? Again?" Ignat was carefully interested, while carefully supporting his wife. "It looks like it," she replied slowly and tried to squeeze out a weak smile. "I'm sorry, darling, but I'm afraid I won't have to postpone the evening for long." To her surprise, her husband behaved in the most adequate way, namely, he offered his help. "What a conversation, Yulia. Let's take you to your room. I think you'd better lie down. Have a rest. If you want, I'll call the doctor." "No, thanks." I hurried to stop his wife. "I really better just go lie down. I'm sure it will be easier for me right away." Ignat took his wife to her personal bedroom, where he helped her change her clothes and climb under a soft, fluffy blanket. After that, his husband, unheard of, made a fragrant hot tea for his wife, and only after all the manipulations he went to his room. Julia lay under a warm blanket and did not stop thinking about why exactly today her husband was so especially affectionate and kind to her. Maybe he guessed something? But no, this is completely excluded. She installed the camera in such a place that it was almost impossible to notice it with the unarmed eye. What was the reason for his strange behavior then? At some point, Julia caught herself thinking that it was extremely saddening to realize to what extent her family had come to, and if she considers the tenderness and attention of her own husband something abnormal. It's okay. We need to calm down. The housewife convinced herself. Tomorrow I will look at the records, or finally understand that I have a paranoia, or, and the second option of developing events, she preferred not to think. The next morning, convinced that Ignat had gone to work, Julia pulled out a hidden camera from the kitchen shelf and hurried to connect it to her computer. In the first few minutes, nothing special happened on the recording. She saw the conversation with her husband and how she went to another room, so that her husband could appreciate her culinary work. However, what Julia saw later really scared and shocked her. It was worth Ignat staying alone at a festive table, as he immediately in a hurry opened a bottle of wine. Then, in one of them, the man poured some strange powder, which until then was stored securely hidden in the pocket of his jacket. With cleverly worked-out movements, Ignat first poured half of the sachet with the powder of jalapeno, and the second half into her plate with salad, after which, as follows, mixed the contents lying next to the wooden spoon. Looking at her, she appears in the frame in a few moments and takes the wretched glass from her husband's hand. "So that's why he was so attentive to me then?" she asked. "He deliberately wanted to take away any suspicions from himself." Julia unwinds the recording a few minutes ago, by the time her husband poured poison into the glass with wine. Having paused the video, Julia carefully looked at the bag of powder. That's right. Red-white packaging, exactly the same as the one that Julia herself found, and in which, obviously, this drug was stored in the form of small, similar to sachet candy. Did this mean that her husband had been poisoning Julia on purpose all this time? Or did he, after all, on the contrary, try to fight against her illness, adding some vitamins to her food, for example? However, the woman soon threw away these naive thoughts. It is unlikely that a person who every time seeks a reason for a scandal will be so shabby in relation to your health. Julia thought about herself and had a hard time breathing. The evidence of the crime committed by Ignat against her was too obvious every day. And yet, she decided not to talk about this topic with her husband yet. She wanted to find out why he even needed to get rid of her in such a monstrous way. At the same time, Julia wanted to check her poisoning theory. During the entire next month, the young woman was very attentive to what she was eating and drinking. Julia cooked for herself, but Ignat was in a hurry to bring her a plate of food or a cup of tea and coffee himself. "Yelenka, look what I brought you here." Ignat gently stroked his wife on the head, and then put a large glass of juice or a smoking cup of incredibly seductive-smelling cocoa in front of her on a journal table. "Oh, darling, thank you. It's so nice of you." Julia's wife smiled sweetly, and then pretended to drink from a mug or taste food. However, in fact, such a show lasted only a couple of seconds. It was worth turning to Ignat, or going out with a happy look into another room. As the girl immediately spat out food and drinks, she had already learned to distinguish between falsehood and the mask that Ignat had not stopped wearing for the last few weeks. Julia understood what his blind concern could be connected with. It was worth only giving up on everything he tried to feed and drink her husband poison. But he should never have guessed that she had revealed his insidious plot, and because Julia continued to pretend that time is getting worse from time. Moreover, with every new attack, the girl made Ignat understand that her health condition is approaching a very critical level. Her husband said in a trembling voice, "Maybe we'll really call the doctor and take you to the hospital? You know my connections. I will provide you with the best ward and service." Ignat's eyes, despite the poorly hidden excitement, shone with almost real delight from everything that was happening. Julia pretended that she was having a great hard time getting up on the bed. She played her role very well. After that, she usually answered her husband with a very weak, sick voice. "Come on, Ignat, don't. It's just that the pressure has jumped. Probably. Please open the window. It's very stuffy in the room." Julia rubbed her chest, carefully depicting that she clearly has heart problems. Ignat, like a mountain goat, literally jumped from her bed and carried on doing almost the last will of his wife. "So, it's okay?" he asked her, opening the window almost to the limit. "Thank you, dear," gave him his wife his pale smile. "It's scary to think what would happen to me if it weren't for you. You have become so attentive. It's a miracle." Ignat, in return, kissed his wife's hands and ordered her the largest bouquet of white roses he could find in flower online stores. Every morning such a bouquet was on the table next to her bed. They slept separately at that moment, since Julia was constantly complaining about insomnia because of her supposedly bad self-esteem, and as if she did not want to torture this beloved Ignat. "Oh, come on. He's already prepared for the funeral, for sure." Suspiciously, Sonia Believa, Julia's childhood friend, who she decided to tell about everything in a couple of days after her last attack, Julia and Sonia were sitting in a small Chinese restaurant on the other end of the city, where no one could have bothered or recognized them for sure. Julia lied to the housekeeper that she was going to the city for shopping for lunch, and that she wants to breathe fresh air while she still has such an opportunity. She herself went straight to her only best friend, with whom she has been supporting warm relations for many years. Sonia was brought up in the same shelter as Julia. She was only a couple of years younger than Chernysheva. Belyeva worked as a programmer in a private IT company and achieved a lot of professional success on this. Having learned that the girl urgently needed to meet in the middle of the working week, the girl immediately left the office. She was released without any problems, since she was on a good balance of the company management, and hurried to the place mentioned by Julia in the SMS. And so Julia told Sony the whole truth about the illegal actions of her husband in the hope of getting some kind of professional advice from the programmer. I mean the decisiveness of Ignato in an attempt to poison his own wife. Although, Yulia, I'm not very surprised for some reason. I didn't like him at first. This is your rich man. Even then, when you met him with everyone. And why did you marry him? Continued to insult your friend. Oh, Sonia. Yulia sighed heavily. As if you don't remember yourself. How old was I then? 22? At this age, we are all naive, trusting, and dream of great love. Well, yes, Sonia interrupted her. But now you don't know where to run such love. I didn't have a special choice in life then, either in a restaurant, in the fact of continuing to work as an waiter from dawn to dawn, or to accept the offer of Ignat, Julia said. On the other hand, I saw at least some kind of life with him. The world looked again. No, at first everything was fine, and his parents took good care of me. It was warm. They never offended me. In fact, do you remember? It was they who introduced me to him. Exactly, Sonia said with a firm nod. You also told me then that his mother and father ordered some exotic dish for themselves, and you were afraid that you would not be able to bring it to their table normally. Julia remembered the events of those days and smiled kindly. It was clear that the girls liked to remember the names of their husbands' parents and their positive attitude towards them. It was a huge Indian girl, Hole. She laughed, remembering last July. In the family of Vera Fedorovna and German Alexandrovich, it was accepted to celebrate the Day of Gratitude. But they didn't like to cook themselves, but preferred to celebrate this in restaurants. They ordered this Indian girl specifically for our then chef in advance. The fact that Ignat came from England that day and was supposed to join the parents for a festive dinner was a pure coincidence for me. Ah, they introduced you to him, didn't they? I clarified as if not to mean a friend. Yes. I nodded in response to Chernysheva. It was the first time in my life when guests asked me to stay and have dinner with them. Kolya, our manager, was terribly angry then. Julia mixed her almost coffee with a spoon. But the Chernyshevs were so excited, as if they liked my service so much that I should definitely try this stupid turkey. Well, they introduced me to Ignat. He was certainly very surprised when he saw me, a simple waitress, sitting at the table with his parents. Sonia, having listened to her friend, yeah, that's the story. A fairy tale. It feels like the Chernyshevs' angels came down to you from heaven and adopted a poor girl, and married her off to their son, the rich man. At least Roman. Write some honest words. Julia just waved. Tell me, Roman, the girl replied, teasing her friend. The fact that my parents never offended me is a fact, yes. It's a pity that German Alexandrovich hasn't been with us for 3 years. Insult. And Vera Fedorovna began to get sick often. Of course, she holds on and does not show that something is wrong with her, but I see it. However, she still supports me and says how to make Ignat like her. But of course, believe ironically noted, any mother will only look for the best for her child. Your old Ignatia must have been given everything on a blue plate with a golden bowl, and her wife found the best for him, which he decided to melt into that color for some reason. Julia felt how her hands froze when she remembered her friend and the last events. In addition, Sonia involuntarily reminded her of what they actually met for. Okay, Sonia. Julia stopped the flow of her irritability towards her husband. Vera Fedorovna told me how she suffered with him before we met. Ignat then drank and walked, on which only the light was, and in the map he spent all the money. The mother-in-law said that he only became more mature with me. He became more intelligent. Finally, he began to get involved in the company. After that, he had such a sharp rise in his career. Sonia silently finished her latte, and putting the cup on the table said, "As you know, Yulka, only the inside of your Ignat is so rotten and nothing can be written here. Okay, friend, I'll help you. I'll follow your husband from the side. Let's see what meetings he has in his free time." "Just be careful, Sonia," asked her friend. "Ignat is a dangerous man, as you can see. Only he can be brainwashed." She just waved her hand. "Don't worry, he probably doesn't remember me. How many years have passed since the wedding?" 3 years, I guess. Considering that we didn't get to know each other that well, because he forbade me to invite you to the wedding because of my unofficial appearance." Sonia and Griva lost their hair, painted in light pink. "So he doesn't know me by sight, but I'll still put on a fire hat so as not to attract other people's attention. And it's cool." Julia thanked her friend and apologized. "I'm sorry I didn't invite you to the wedding. I should have insisted on my own. Explain that I don't care about some conditions." And I was silent then. The panties were young. Sonia just smiled, fixing her big designer glasses. "Come on, Julia. I would be friends with you if I ever got worried. Your husband is a bastard in his uniform, of course, but you have nothing to do with it. You are a victim, and until the case has taken a very large turn, we need to get you out of all this, and as soon as possible." The friends hugged and agreed to meet at the same place exactly a week later. During this time, Sonia promised to dig as much material as possible for Julia's husband and give it to her. "You will decide for yourself what to do next. But I would run away from this guy with all my legs." Sonia said goodbye, after which she disappeared in the flow of city streets. Yulia hurried home, on the way to the grocery supermarket. Neither her husband nor the security guards had to suspect anything. She understood well that she should be stabbed somewhere, as they immediately informed Ignat about everything. And then the consequences of her adventures can be completely unpredictable. She just has no right to take such a risk. A week later, they met again in the same Chinese restaurant, and Sonia put a whole pack of piquant photos on Yulia's table. "What is it?" Yulia asked, surprised. The friend just clenched her tongue and sarcastically smiled. "Yes," I thought. "What if you don't believe my words? So even with photos, then I can convince you that your husband is a horn for you." Julia was not offended by Sony's rudeness. After all, she was like this since childhood. Much more young women were upset by the photos on which Ignat was captured in a meaningless campaign of a lush beauty with black and blue hair and blue eyes like the sky. She was constantly kissing him, Julia, and literally whistling at him, while they were relaxing in some cafe with Ignat. With this permission, I can say, ladies, Ignat meets 3 times a week in the Moriman Cafe. She continued to report to Julia the results of her surveillance of Belayev. And this is what I showed you, the most innocent picture, without details, so to speak. Speaking, the last phrase of Sonia was distorted. It seemed to her unpleasant to even remember about it. From there, they immediately head to the hotel. "Slowed down," the friend said. "I think you don't need to explain what all this means." Julia looked at the photos and felt an absolute emptiness inside. She didn't know what to answer, perhaps because somewhere deep inside her soul she had long suspected her husband of infidelity. Chernyshova asked, "Are you sure he didn't notice you?" The girl sitting opposite just smiled at Yulia. "What about that?" "You can be sure. I was very careful and only filmed on the phone." Sony proudly said, "I have a special printer at home that prints photos with a high-quality smartphone." Yulia nodded and barely got up from the table. Now she knew for sure that her husband had a mistress. Could it be that it was because of her that he wanted to deprive Yulia of her life? What should I do now? How to get on? Having made several rounds around the city on his small car, The girl came to the conclusion that the recording with the hidden camera and the photo are enough arguments to sue her husband for a divorce. Julia was not ready to endure constant treason, as well as to be honest, subject to danger and lose her life. Therefore, in the evening, as soon as Ignat returned home, his wife honestly told him about everything she had learned and asked his husband to officially disperse their relationship. Choose. Julia spoke calmly, putting a video camera on her husband's table and laying out his compromising photos. Or you go to prison for several years for the attempt of my poisoning. Or you give me a divorce, because I know very well that you have a mistress. How could you even think of this, Ignat? Why are you doing this to me? The husband from whom the mask of all love and care flew off in the same moment was inextricably angry with the situation. It doesn't hurt him to want to share all the money earned by the divorce with such a weak capital. The villain said, Ignat, and you, it turns out, are not as stupid as I look. What? You were watching me? Yes, I was watching. With indescribable appearance, Julia replied, and you would not follow those who, as it turned out, wish your death. Instead of the answer, the man only laughed maliciously. Yes, because you are empty like a fresh cake. You have neither beauty nor passion. So, you can only drive comfortably. You can't do it anymore. Julia was grumpy. If you wanted to insult me now, I'm in a hurry to disappoint you. Your words no longer affect me. You have tried too often to destroy my self-esteem, like I did. Enough already. Either sign the divorce papers or sit down for a long time. I guarantee you this. With these words, Julia hid the camera and photos in her bag. Ignat felt that inside him there was a fight between greed and fear. On the one hand, he was counting on taking all the money alone and living with Angela, so his mistress was called, singing along. On the other hand, this idiot will write a complaint to him directly, and the landing of the businessman's plans definitely did not work. Well, okay, he didn't want to. I'll sign your documents. Just keep in mind, I'm dragging you down the drain. You won't get a penny from my money. Julia looked at him with honest pity. God with you, Ignat, I never needed your money. You can take everything you want. I'll write a refusal. Just let me go for God's sake, and let me live a normal life without your constant curses and humiliation. I'm looking for and poisoning me, you scoundrel. She took her suitcase, which she had prepared in advance. The woman did not want to stay in this house for more than a minute, and with a moderate walk she headed out. Julia already took the door handle when she heard a strange phrase from her husband. Well, get out of here. Get out, you bitch. If you want to know, my parents made me marry you in. General, if it weren't for them, I would not have tied the same damn thing with you in my life. Julia was for a moment detained, but immediately slammed the front door behind her. Who knows if this fool can talk about her in a moment of anger? And even then, the wife would think of threatening to go to prison and get divorced. What a drunkard from her side. Thinking about this, she just smiled. God, how long this circus has been going on. However, sitting in the car, Julia started to doubt. The whole way to Sony's apartment, which allowed her to live with herself until she decided to move on with her plans, she was not left with a question. Why did Ignat's parents forcefully marry him to a poor, simple, like a church mouse orphanage? Yulia had no money behind her back. All that she had managed to save up over the past few months is a small amount that the woman planned to spend on a rented apartment. Sonia was so generous that she allowed her friends to live with her for free. Chernyasheva did not know what she would do after the divorce. She only knew that she would definitely find a job for herself so as not to be dependent on her gloomy past anymore. Believa welcomed Yulia with open arms, in which she immediately fell, hugging her best friend tightly. Julia could not get rid of the words of her husband by the impulsive refrain that was repeated in her head. This mother and father married me to you. They made me understand. I would not get married to such a wobbler as you would. The next morning, after Sonia went to work, Julia pulled out a small notebook from her bag and began to nervously scroll through her pages one after another. Finally, she found the phone she needed and typed the cherished numbers on the mobile screen. After a few seconds, a cherished click was heard on the other side of the phone, and a pleasant male voice was heard. Captain Karasev listens. Lyonya? Asked Chernyshiva in a trembling voice. It's me, Yulia Lavrova. Remember me? We were brought up in the same orphanage, in Dernovka. A few seconds later, absolute silence hung in the phone, and then the same voice, surprised but happy, asked again. Lavrova, Yulia, is that you? Oh my God, how many years have passed? How are you? How are you doing? Yulia sighed heavily. Yes, everything is fine in general. Lyonya, I need to talk to you seriously. Can we meet today? Of course. Tell me where I will be in an hour. In a moment, her childhood friend assured her with a concentrated and harsh voice. After meeting in the local bar an hour later, she explained to the man her request. She wanted to know as much as possible about her real parents. Why did they get into that accident? What did they live before? You see, I don't know anything about them, Yulia crumbled. And only now I realized how much I missed in my life. Maybe if I were more interested in those who they were in childhood, then now I would not have encountered certain, let's call it so, difficulties. Yulia, Leonid, being a policeman, could really help Julia, and she wanted to find out the whole truth about her family to the very end. Okay, Karasev agreed. I'll help you, but I'm forced to warn you right away. The information collection is not a quick thing. We'll have to wait a while. I'm ready. She nodded in response to him, and this was the end of their conversation. After they chatted a little with Leonid, remembered the past, and then each of them took care of their own business. Julia really hoped that she would not have to wait too long, since Ignat had already sent all the necessary documents for the divorce, and she was given a long-term bureaucratic valakita related to the refusal of her share of property and money assets. Exactly 3 weeks later, the girl called Karasev and again asked for a meeting. At first, Yulia was confused and even a little scared, but Leonid assured her that this was only for her own safety. Having found herself in the captain's office, Chernyshiva immediately started to do the job, asking the policeman to tell her everything he could find out. In the process of telling Karaseva, Yulia's amazement grew more and more, for it was incredibly difficult for her to believe what she had heard. Well, Yul, you gave me a task. I have nothing to say. The policeman began. I didn't even think that I would have to be it. And I mean, Yulenka, that Vera Fedorovna is yours, and German Alexandrovich is not at all as white and fluffy as you thought them all your life. I thought I didn't know that you were now counting on the Chernyshev passport, and that you were thinking about getting a divorce from their son. This is, by the way, the right decision. Yulia was scared for a second that Leonid had already learned everything about poisoning. However, her answer was quite amazing. These Chernysshevs, Vera Fedorovna and her husband, came with direct companions to your parents. Slowly, so that the girl understood every word, the policeman explained. But Svetlana Nikolaevna and Boris Stanislavovich Lavrovi, your parents, owned a large company for the production of sports equipment. They were businessmen and millionaires, Yul. Karasev folded his hands on his chest, watching how the women sitting in front of him are circling around, surprised by the eyes. He realized that she really didn't know anything about it. Not only did Chernysovs help Lavrov sell their products abroad, but they also envied the success of the flourishing family. Chernysovs themselves were not doing very well, the captain said. Loans, and the son of an alcoholic, who lost all the money in the cards. In a word, they had problems above the roof. And what? What is the connection between all this? Yulia did not understand. Your father and mother died in a car accident, said Karasev. They accidentally went to the meeting house when they returned home from the airport. Only there is a suspicion that the brake hose of the car was intentionally cut. The matter is dead, the involvement in this by the Chernyshevs then. Leonid gathered his strength and took a deep breath before going to the final part, which directly concerns Julia. After the death of your parents, Lavrov's companions gave you to the orphanage. What? Not in the strength to believe in what was happening, Julia exhaled. Yes, the captain sighed. After that, however, they did not stop following you and interested in how you live. Of course, Chernyshov managed to capture the entire state of Lavrov's partners by means of the most difficult legal manipulations. However, they perfectly understood that while the stomach is a direct heir, their prosperity remains hanging on the hair. So they came up with a very cunning plan. Marry your son, Ignat. Of course, when you reach your full life and leave the shelter. She did not believe her husband. So this is why Vera Fedorovna was so excited then in the restaurant, which was given to them by German Alexander. This is why she was forced to stay and wait for Ignat's arrival. She thought that they really liked it, but it turns out they knew her for a long time. Julia was ready to cry out of consciousness of the fact that all this time she played the role of a money bag for her husband's parents. I'm very sorry, but the Chernyshevs wanted to have not only their impudent son under supervision, but also you. So they connected you with the priests of the marriage. The calculation was that you would not stick your nose where it shouldn't be, and thus you will never learn the truth about your family. And the money? Well, they will remain with the Chernyshevs until you decide to dispute the assets and take your legal part. Not a small one, by the way. This is in case you still think about leaving your entire inheritance to your husband. Julia was in a real shock. After learning the truth, she thanked Karasev with all her heart, after which the lightning rushed into the house of her almost already ex-husband. Ignat let her in unwillingly. It seemed that he knew nothing about the scheme of his relatives. Do you want to say that you don't know? Asked angry Julia. Isn't that why you tried to poison me? To get all my money? Ignat poured himself a large glass of whiskey. His wife saw that he was as surprised as she was. No, it was not like that. Ignat's head shook negatively. I wanted to get rid of you. But this is all Angela, my new, or rather already ex-new girl. Ignat looked at his wife, and his cheeks were covered with blush. We're done with her, he explained, but Julia only waved her hand, saying that she was not interested. Then the man continued. It was she who advised me to give you that medicine. She said, if we want to be together, we need to clear the road and stay with the money. Angela knew the meaning of such drugs. She worked as a nurse in the past. Well, she says, let's give her 1 sasha a week. She will gradually get better. And the main thing is that nothing can be proved. The drug is absorbed very quickly and well, leaving no traces in the body. I agreed. In the face of Julia, he saw nothing but contempt. What a bastard you are, Chernyshov, she said in an icy voice. Now, when I know the whole truth, even without counting and getting all the money, I take my half. That day, Julia left her house, now exactly her ex-husband as a real winner. Having restored justice and taken most of her money with Ignat when she divorced, Julia finally felt real freedom. Thanks to Sonia for her support and shelter, Julia gave the girls a completely new high-tech computer monoblock, and the friend, who returned her native surname Lavrova, went on to start a new life. Thinking about what to do in the future, Julia stopped her choice of restaurant business. She always liked to cook, and the experience she received during her work as a waitress. He was able to understand the subtleties of cooking art. Having bought a house in another, far from the husband's cottage in the village, Julia began to slowly understand her future business. Having behaved properly, visiting the beauty salon and renewing her wardrobe, Lavrova entered the door of her new restaurant, not as a former teacher of a children's home, but as a successful businesswoman. The irony was that the young woman acquired the restaurant where the waitress worked in her youth. The staff, who had never changed at that time, were very surprised to find out about their former colleague in the new hostess. They were used to seeing her first as a beggar from the shelter, and then as a millionaire's wife, but on bird rights. And they did not expect that she would turn out to be a beautiful and a confident young businesswoman. Julia Borisovna, your coffee and a report from last month. There was a fuss around Lavrova Nikolai, the same manager who in the past often joked around with the girl and never took her seriously. Thank you, Nikolai Dmitrievich. With a smile, Julia answered him. Don't forget, the hall must open at, not later. Make sure all employees come to work on time and in advance, if they do not want to lose their quarterly bonus. In general, Julia quickly adapted to the management of restaurants and treated them well to all her subordinates. But sometimes she still had to show firmness so as not to lose her directorial authority among employees. Once Julia went to the cemetery to visit the grave of her parents. For her, it was still strange to stand and look at the photos, which she, in fact, never knew, but which really loved her. Only now, at the threshold of her birthday, Julia was finally able to learn the truth about her origin and find her own legal place in this world. I miss you so much, said the young woman, lowering a lush bouquet of lycros on the grave of her parents. Although I did not know you, I still hope that you remember me. There, in the sky. Then Julia suddenly heard a song whistling behind her back, as someone quietly whistled the song she had known since childhood. And when she returned, Lavrova saw a little boy, 7 years old. The sluggish boy calmly, without any fear, walked around the graves and collected the candies left on them by the relatives of the deceased. Hey boy, what are you doing here? Asked little Julia. The boy did not expect to see someone here at such an early hour. It was only a.m., and because of that, he almost jumped out of fear. Phew, Annie, well, you scared me. The boy sighed with relief. I probably thought about it quickly, but I didn't notice you. What am I doing? Yes, I'm just walking. Good people sometimes leave sweets here, so I take it until no one sees it. Julia was a little dizzy. Why can't your parents buy you sweets when you're walking around the grave? It's dangerous for children your age to be alone in such a place. And it's not fun here. So what? The boy in response smiled. What are you, Auntie? I've been running around here for so long, and not a single ghost has eaten me yet. And so, I live with my boy now, while my dad works in the north. But only his real frog is different. He beats me and leads other men home. All the money is spent on vodka by my father. So it's better for me to sit here. It's better than going home. Did you tell your father that you are badly treated in his absence? Julia asked carelessly. She felt sorry for the boy, and for some reason it seemed that he was talking about the boy's pure truth. Of course, I told him. The boy scratched his back. He had very soft, light-haired hair. But the dad doesn't believe. Listen and tell the inn and don't argue with her. That's all. The owner of the restaurant didn't risk leaving the child alone in the cemetery, and therefore took him and sheltered him at home. There she gave the boy hot tea and learned that the boy's name is Vanya Semikin and that his father Alexei works as a builder in the north, where he goes to earn money by watch method. And all this time his mother never came back for him. Soon, Vanya's father came from Zarbikov. July. Until then, the man's profile found in one of the social networks told him everything about the situation with his son and others. Alexei did not make himself wait long, and a few hours after returning, he came by taxi to Lavrova's house. Vanya, he shouted, hugging the boy who jumped at him. Dad, he shouted at Vanya, with all his might, hugging his little fists to his father's back. Thank you for watching my video. Thank you, Alexei Yuliev. I didn't believe this fool boy, and how this nasty Inna stopped going out with me. I thought about it. Thank God you found him and adopted him. Otherwise, if something happened to my son, I would have strangled this fool with my own hands. No, I was only happy. Your boy is good, curious. Yulia smiled. I gave him a few books from my library. Let him read them in good health. And well, the builder kicked out of the house right away. He did not understand what and how, and he saw how she was watching for her son in his absence. From that moment on, Alexei began to treat Ivan more carefully, and no longer trusted the child to almost unknown people. He had only met with Inna a few months ago. Then she seemed to be a very attractive and modest man. But it was just a person who hid the bitter interests of a woman who saw in the laborer wrecker a favorable option for herself. Alexei really liked Julia, and Tanya hid her sympathy for the young builder. He seemed to her truly reliable and devoted, and how much he loved Vanechka only added to him in the eyes of Julia order and respect. Simikin, the elder, in turn, understood that a woman who alone manages such a famous restaurant and herself without servants, keeping clean and cozy her home, can be trusted not only her own heart and future, but also the future of her own son, with whom Julia was perfectly in tune. So, step by step, Alexei and Julia began to meet. Love between them burst out quickly, but it was a strong and warm feeling based on trust, sincere admiration and respect for each other's inner world. Passion and romance, which is as good as champagne, came to them a little later, but the sweeter and more valuable was this amazing feeling. 6 months later, the couple played a modest and family-friendly quiet wedding that was celebrated at the restaurant of Julia. The woman just wanted to enjoy her newly given happiness, and therefore tried to make this event as chamber-like as possible. The bride's party was only the closest. Sonia Believa, the best friend who helped out in the most difficult moment, and Captain Leonid Karasev, a loyal friend and reliable defender. By the way, Leonid and Sonia really liked each other. Julia hopes that next year they will be with Alexei at the wedding of their best friends. A few months later, the owner of the restaurant was happy to hear from her husband that their small family is going to have a serious replenishment. Julia and ZY showed a double. The family of Semikin and Lavrov is extremely happy, especially little Vanya, who will now have 2 brothers at once. The screen showed that both twins were boys. At the same time, somewhere very far, on the outskirts of the city, in a simple 2-room house, the former husband of Julia, Ignat, was drinking. Here he lived with his mother, Vera Fedorovna, who, without millions of ex-sisters-in-law, very quickly regretted that she had once deceived the orphan. The thing was that after the death of Julia and her lover, Ignat finally let himself go, and in half a year he lost what was still a little bit of his own family assets. The chic house of Chernyshovs went from a hammer to a debt payment, and the son of a drunkard with his mother, who had finally lost her former. After the whole story with the frauds of assets was revealed, business partners refused to work with Chernyshov on the truss, and the business of their lives suffered a terrible collapse. Thank you for watching the story to the end. If you like this story, please support me with the thumbs up button. It is very important to me. All the best.